When we say work-life balance as opposed to life-work balance, we are subconsciously programming ourselves to prioritize work over life. So work-life balance, it's really a term that's not serving us. And the first reframe is clearly life-work balance or life-work harmony or life-work integration, however you want to say it.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. I'm joined today by Sam Kabert. Sam is an expert in subconscious reprogramming, nervous system regulation, and breathwork integration. As a successful entrepreneur turned mental wellness coach, he's helped high-performing leaders break free from burnout, stress, and emotional roadblocks. Sam is one of the keynote speakers for the North Texas SHRM Annual Conference on April 28th and 29th. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Sam.
Mike, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
So your presentation at the North Texas SHRM Annual Conference is Soul-Life Balance, Trying Breathe to Overcome Stress and Anxiety. And BREATHE is an acronym. Can you start by explaining the idea behind soul-life balance, especially to that listener who thinks that already sounds a little bit too woo for the business conference?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. So I was named to Silicon Valley's 40 under 40 list at just 31 years old, and that's a list of being top 40 most influential people under 40 years old. And I mean, to be named to that list at 31 was a huge honor. It was a big goal of mine. I also hit $1 million in sales in my business and was working less than 4 hours a day. So I say all of that just to illustrate a point that I had what is the perceived notion of work-life balance, right? I had financial freedom. I could work when I wanted to work. And yet I was deeply, deeply depressed and numb after achieving those goals. So I talked about this in a TED Talk I did in 2024. And basically in deep introspection, really surrendering to those thoughts and feelings that were coming up, I heard the message of soul-life balance rather than work-life balance. And I didn't know much what to do with that until I went deeper and started to learn more. And the easiest way to think about it is looking at the archetypal energies of the yin and yang or yang, because we're all familiar with that symbol, yet we don't necessarily totally understand what it means or what it represents. So I break it down like this. The yang is the light side of the symbol, the white side, and the yin is the dark side. Yang represents how we perceive the world, how we move through the world with our five senses, obligations, responsibilities. The yin is our inner world, which is made up of our mental and emotional state. So now that we understand those energies, we can apply them to work-life balance and see that both work and life require those yang energies and we need both. So I believe the number one reason why especially business professionals are facing this mental and emotional health crisis, the epidemic of it, is because we're disconnected from our inner world of our mental and emotional state. So when I say soul life balance, what I'm referring to with soul is the yin energy of our inner world of mental and emotional health, while life is the outer world, responsibilities, obligations, all those things, including life and work.
So what's the difference between yin, which is kind of a term we know from Eastern philosophy, and what we normally hear in the West would just call wellness or well-being?
Well, like I was explaining earlier, we're looking at as yin being the inner world of mental and emotional health. That's what it is right there. And a lot of times in corporate structures or when we talk about wellness, we're just checking the boxes. We're just going through it. For example, I did a presentation last year teaching the 6-step breath process, which, as you mentioned, is an acronym. And it goes along with my #1 best-selling book called Overcome the Overwhelm. So in this presentation, I'm talking about overcoming overwhelm, which is clearly a feeling. And I had someone in the audience ask me after the presentation, she said, you talked a lot about feelings, but the thing is, feelings don't have an intelligence. What do you have to say about that? And that question alone goes to show how disconnected we are from our inner world and how much we think that we're not feeling. Yet we're always talking about our feelings. We'll say, oh, I feel this way, I feel that way, but they don't have an intelligence. Let's think about this. What is emotional intelligence then? So I think there's a big misunderstanding of what wellness actually is, especially in the corporate world. And the best way we can get in touch with our mental and emotional health is through learning how to regulate our nervous system, which we can do through breath work.
That's an interesting take on feelings, because I've got a mindfulness practice, and the way I've always addressed feelings, especially uncomfortable feelings or feelings that don't really serve me, is to approach them and just acknowledge them, recognize that that's what they are, and then intentionally, I guess, set those aside and focus on what else could be true, or what else is really going on. And like you said, the breath work, focusing on my breathing, controlling where my thoughts lead me, bringing them back to center, those kind of things. So say a little bit more. I mean, I don't want to, for our listeners, I don't want to get too woo, but I'm really interested now in what you're saying about feelings and the tie back to what we consider emotional intelligence and how the power our feelings have over us.
Yeah, I mean, none of this is quote unquote woo or woo woo or esoteric or spiritual or anything. This is grounded science. Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, are you familiar with her work?
I'm not.
So she was on the main TED stage, not TEDx, the main TED stage in 2008. And her TED Talk blew up TED. That's what really made TED, the organization, so famous. Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor went on to be named to one of Time's most influential people in 2008. She's a neuroanatomist, meaning that she studies the brain. She literally brought a brain on stage with the spinal cord, and she explained the 90-second rule, that our body has a 90-second physiological response when we experience an emotion. And what that means is, if, to your point, like allowing yourself to recognize these feelings, getting curious and sitting with them. If you do that, what's called shadow work, which is a term coined by the psychologist, the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, which means to make the unconscious to conscious awareness, because our unconscious mind makes up 95% of our awareness. That's everything we don't have access to. So most of our awareness, we don't even know what's going on. So if you do this shadow work and you allow yourself to feel those feelings coming up to the surface, then you can move through them in as little as 90 seconds. Yet the question I get most often is, well, okay, if we can process our emotions in as little as a minute and a half, 2 minutes, whatever, how come I'm still feeling this way afterwards? So when I had Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor on my podcast called Soul Seeker, which is a little bit more of a woo title, right? But when I had her on the pod, I asked her that very question. And she said, well, it's because you're not allowing yourself to feel those emotions. So it starts a new 90-second cycle, and you're getting caught in that loop. So if I were to use more like woo language, I would say, hey, emotions are energy in motion, which is something I say, but it's also like knowing who your audience is. And if I tell you the 90-second rule, that's saying, oh, wow, it's not just this cute saying that the root meaning of emotions is energy in motion. That's actually backed by science. And here's a neuroanatomist that told us this back in 2008, that was named to Time's 100 most influential people. Yet when I went through my breathwork certificate training, my yoga instructor training, and all these different trainings, NLP master practitioner training, all Reiki, all of these things, and even grounded personal development as well, no one ever talks about the 90-second rule, which is why I'm so passionate about teaching the 90-second rule, because all of this is based in science. And when we use science, then we don't get met with like, oh, that sounds a little woo. You know what I mean?
So dive more into that 90-second rule then. Somebody says something to annoy me in a meeting, and my first response is to grind them down or to act in a defensive way or whatever. How do I use this 90-second rule to prevent myself from doing that and from carrying that on in throughout the rest of my day?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mike. And when I speak to first responders, one of the things I talk about a lot is compartmentalization. And you kind of allude to this earlier. And I'm just going to bring that up now, so both of us remember to touch on compartmentalization later on, because that's an important piece of it. But the breath process, the word breath broken down into an acronym, is what I'll be teaching at the conference. And it's the framework as well for my book, Overcome the Overwhelm. And this was born from the most challenging time in my life when I thought my life was going so smooth. I was doing all this work, then it totally imploded. And then I need something to not only help me zoom out and look at my life and do the quote unquote shadow work, but also process those triggers in real time. And I'd already known about this 90-second rule, but I was like, okay, I understand, to your point, like I understand science teaches this, but what do I do in those 90 seconds? So the word breath is broken down to 6 steps. There's 6 letters in the word, and it's most easily summarized with 3 simple themes. First, breathe, feel, then think intentionally. So I'll walk you through it. The first step of the breath process is like, oh, I'm feeling something rising to the surface, right? My body's getting heated. I'm starting to get agitated. It feels like I just had an espresso shot, whatever it is. Okay, let me breathe to slow down. Let me connect with my breath. That's the B in the breath process. R, relax. Let me relax into this so I allow myself to feel, because usually when those triggers happen, we go into unconscious patterns, and more than anything, we're disassociating. So we want to do the opposite of what we've been conditioned to do and actually relax into it so we feel safe enough to feel what's coming to the surface. Energy to reveal. That's the third one. If emotions are energy in motion, then this energy that's coming up, what is it revealing to me? That's when I get curious. That's when I start to lean in and do the shadow work. 4, accept to surrender. That's the A in the breath process, because oftentimes what comes up in the third step of asking questions is like, oh no, I don't want to see that. I don't want whatever it is. So we have to accept it. And this is the movement of toxic positivity, because toxic positivity will say, hey, never entertain a negative thought or feeling. Whereas we're doing the opposite, being like, no, we're doing this deep work, even though it feels uncomfortable. And then at that point, we've earned the right to transform that negativity into an empowering belief. That's the 5th step, the T in breath, transform into an empowering belief. So it's just an I am statement. Finally, H, habits to integrate. As a result of what came up, what new habits, actions, behaviors am I going to take? If I'm in a meeting, or if you're in a meeting with someone and you're feeling agitated, you're not going to be able to run through those 6 steps and just be like, hey, time out. I need to work on me. Go through this real quick, which is why we need to practice this on our own. So it becomes autopilot when we get triggered. It's like, oh, I feel that right now. Instead of reacting, I'm going to respond. One of the things I teach people that I'm so passionate about is what I call the ninja breath. And the ninja breath is based off the cyclic sigh. Again, science. Stanford's lab did a study to compare what would be the most efficient way to regulate your nervous system into rest and digest to overcome stress and anxiety in real time and have impacting effects throughout the rest of the day. And what they found is that the cyclic sigh is more effective than anything else. It's just a big inhale up through the nose, sipping in a bit more air at the top, then exhaling through the mouth. So I call the ninja breath the same thing as that, but just a subtle inhale through the nose, inhaling all the way up, sipping in a bit more air at the top, and exhaling through the nose versus the mouth. And you could even practice that right now, Mike, or the listeners as well. And the more you start to practice that, if you're just focusing on your inhale, you inhale all the way up through the nose, sip in a bit more at the top, and then through the nose, just subtly exhale. You can do, I call it the ninja breath, because imagine you're in conversation with someone else and you're thinking about what you're going to say next. You wouldn't want to be like over dramatic and exhale through the mouth and this whole thing, like just subtly focusing on your breath. And when you do that, those thoughts start to slow down. You start to make the unconscious to conscious awareness, and you're retraining your nervous system to be in an ongoing state in rest and digest, so that when those triggers come up, you go, hey, I'm feeling triggered right now. And instead of reacting, you choose to respond.
So yeah, that's what in my yoga practice I would call Ujjayi pranayama, right? Is there, are you approaching that differently than the idea of, the deep inhale, hold it, and then that controlled release? Is that the same thing that we would talk about when we're talking about Ujjayi pranayama or something like that in the yoga practice?
Not necessarily, because as you know, Ujjayi breath is more that ocean wave sound at the back. You're not doing anything like that. Ujjayi doesn't necessarily have a hold. It's more rhythmic. This is called the physiological sigh. What Dr. Andrew Huberman's lab found is that we naturally do this physiological sigh when we feel a little bit of stress or whatever it is. So I said, hey, like, what happens if we did this continuously? And that's why they call it the cyclic sigh, cycle, continuously doing it. So it is different than that. Typically, when I cue this in my breathwork sessions, I'll do an inhale through the nose all the way up, sip in a bit more at the top, and then I'll have the students hold for a few seconds. And those few seconds of the breath hold, as you likely know, will get us into more of a transient hypofrontality type feeling, where the prefrontal cortex, I should say, starts to turn off, which is our thinking brain, so that we can go from our thinking brain to our feeling brain, which is the limbic brain.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. At Imperative, we help risk-averse clients make well-informed decisions about the people they involve in their business. In the HR context, that means we provide the most thorough and compliant background investigations, backed up by the best customer support in the industry. Our goal is that you never need to reach out to our support team, but if you do, they'll answer the phone and solve your issue right away. You can learn more about how we make our clients' lives easier and more secure at imperativeinfo.com. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Recert Credits. Then select episode 196 and enter the keyword breath. That's BREATH. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Sam Kabert. So let's talk about that. Okay, so on an individual basis, right? These are practices that we can adopt and, manage our world, our lives better, definitely be better, coworkers, community members, family members, all of those things. Make the business case for me then, for a business leader, that this is something important that as a business we should focus on when we're talking about what we're going to offer our employees as far as wellness and well-being offerings.
Have you ever watched the show Severance, Mike?
I haven't. My family has, and I watch so little TV. I've got to block off a bunch of time so I can catch it because everybody tells me it's amazing.
Yeah, it's funny. I was big on Severance when it first came out, and then whatever it was, the writer's block or, lockdowns, pandemic, whatever it was, I think they took a few years hiatus and now it's like blown up, and I think it's just the second season now. But when I first started giving soul life balance presentations, I would bring up Severance. And back then, I mean, the show was still on Apple and it was still produced by Ben Stiller and all the things, yada, 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 but it doesn't have like the popularity it has now. But back then, what I would say is in this show, Severance, they literally have a medical procedure where when they go to work, they know nothing about their personal life. And when they're in their personal lives, they know nothing about work. So I would make the case then, can we now see that we don't have a personal life and we don't have a work life unless you are a character in Severance that had this medical procedure, right? It's funny because a lot of the business demographic really loves Severance, it seems like. And it's like, you guys, don't you see this? Like, there is no difference between our personal and business life. So the reason why I bring that up, because you mentioned like, oh, I see the case in my personal life with my family, but what's the case for our business life, and how we show up and work? It's the same thing, and especially when I'm working with first responders, like they really have a separation between personal and work life, right? And arguably it makes a little bit more sense than the everyday professional. But the point being is, if we can process how we're feeling and show up with confidence, clarity, enter into these flow states, not drag that stuff from our quote unquote personal life into the work life, just as much as it's important to not drag that into quote unquote the personal life, like they're intertwined. Another thing I've been doing for over 10 years is the acronym called WIFLE. And I learned this at a conference in a business setting back in like 2013 or something. But WIFLE stands for what I feel like expressing. So at the time, I mean, I was probably like 25 years old or something like that, and going to an office supply conference. And, back then it was everything was way more professional than it is these days. And that's where I learned WIFLE, what I feel like expressing. And the idea was starting a meeting with this WIFLE where if I am in a typical business meeting and there's someone that seems a little distracted, we have no idea what is going on in that person's life. So the WIFLE is opening up the space saying like, hey, if you were a little stressed getting the kids to school this morning, or you just got some bad news, or you're feeling anxiety about something later on in the day, this is an opportunity to have a safe space in a business setting to express yourself so that everyone else isn't like, hey, what's going on with Sherry? Like, why does Sherry seem like she's in the mood? Or whoever it is, right? It gives them an opportunity, and that creates a culture of psychological safety, feeling seen, and all of that. So even the WIFLE, that's something I've been using for over 10 years, and that makes a huge impact in the corporate environment.
I'm part of a peer group. You're probably familiar with it, EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, and we start all our small group meeting, our peer group meetings, with one of the questions: is there anything that would stop you from being fully present in the next 4 hours? These are extended meetings, and I think that's the same kind of thing, right? And certainly sometimes somebody will say something and that becomes our priority as a group, trying to hold somebody up rather than whatever our other agenda was. So you mentioned WIFLE. What other kind of practices could a leader then incorporate into the business environment in order to promote this soul life balance?
Yeah, I mean, my big thing is teaching the breath process, the breath framework. Soul life balance is a way of viewing our lives where it's not necessarily focused on end destination, because when we talk about work-life balance, usually we're seeing it as one day I will get to this end destination. Soul life balance is more about practice. Additionally, we can look at common terms, and usually the letter that is closer to the A would be the first word in that phrase. So, for example, the L in life is closer to an A versus a W, being closer to Z. And if we really cared about people's mental health, we wouldn't say work-life balance for that reason. Additionally, when we say work-life balance as opposed to life-work balance, we are subconsciously programming ourselves to prioritize work over life. So work-life balance is really just it's kind of like, oh, let's just put this out there, check the box, like we're doing the thing, but it's really a term that's not serving us. And the first reframe is clearly life work balance or life work harmony or life work integration, however you want to say it. And if you want to go soul life balance, that's cool. But, I'm not trying to be like, oh, this is the way. It's the people that are into it. That's great. But the breath framework is a way that we can learn to regulate our thoughts and our feelings, our nervous system, really, so that we can show up fully. So what I have is something called the Breath Club. It's a completely free online community where every single week I have people coming into these Zoom sessions where I'm leading them through breath work. And most of the people showing up are executives, they're entrepreneurs, they're business professionals. They're not your typical like woo type person that's just wanting to, get blast off and have like a DMT type experience through their breath. No, the type of breath work I lead is like landing in your body, so that you can feel what's coming up to the surface, so that you can process it, so you don't have that lingering. And when we take care of ourselves, we're able to co-regulate with other people around us. So the biggest thing I can encourage people to do is to find what works for you. And the best thing we can do, whether it's a diet, exercise, new habits and routines, is starting off in the morning, but especially with breath work. If you can just take a couple of minutes when you wake up in the morning, or just 3 deep breaths, that's a start. Just checking in with yourself. How am I feeling in this moment? How do I want to set the tone for today? And continuously, I hear from my clients, people I work with, and experience it for myself. When I start my day first thing in the morning with breath work, then everything else falls into place. When that trigger situation comes up, I've already started off the tone of being like, I'm landed in my body, I'm feeling what's coming to the surface, and I'm going to process it. So that's the best thing a leader can do, so that they can show up for themselves, then everyone around them.
So a leader should model that, and probably it's not very effective once they've adopted the practice of, they kind of need to share it, I guess, with their teams, and what the value they found in it. Is that what you'd suggest? Or, I mean, I'm very hesitant. I'm always hesitant. I tell people, once you adopt any new practice or whatever, keep it to yourself until it's really become ingrained in how you live, and it's you've seen the efficacy of it and it's changed your behavior, and let people notice the behavior change before you start telling them what caused it. But I'd be curious what your take is. If I'm a leader and I'm experiencing this and I need to model, I want to introduce it to my people, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I literally said the exact same thing in my own words on stage at Sherm Talent in Nashville. I said, hey, come to these breathwork sessions, come to the Breath Club, experience it for yourself. And when you see the differences, then go and share it with your team. Same thing. Yeah.
So when the rest of your presentation, you're talking about soul life balance, you're talking about the BREATH method that you've got. What's one other takeaway that audiences can look forward to hearing and to learning from your presentation?
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of ground so far. The Ninja Breath is absolutely a massive takeaway. If you take anything away from this at all, just focusing on your breath right now and noticing how that calms everything down and taking that with you, like that is one of the things that's going to be more impactful than anything else. Many people at this point are familiar with the subconscious mind, making up 95% of our awareness. As I mentioned earlier, what's not necessarily as common for a lot of folks is that in any given moment, we are processing over 2 million bits of information, and only 126 of those make it to our conscious awareness. It's basically another way of framing the 95% subconscious versus 5% conscious. And the way that comes through is through deletion, distortion, and generalization. So there's a lot of lessons around the subconscious mind. My whole thing is like, there's a lot of people that talk about the subconscious mind, which is the language of the mind. And there's a lot of people who talk about the nervous system, which is the language of the body. But I bring the two together so that you can learn how to regulate your nervous system, the body, along with reframing and understanding what's going on through your mind. And all of that's through the breath process.
And you wanted to make sure we got back to compartmentalization. And my thought when you were talking about first responders, trying to compartmentalize that, or any of us, is the same. It's the same thing I've always thought about any kind of work/life or life/work balance. Work is part of life. I mean, if you're going to work all day, that's that's part of your life. That's part of the 16 hours of awake and 24 hours in a day that you get. And I think about those compartmentalizations like buckets. They're going to be splashing into each other all day long. And so, I'm curious to hear more about what your take on, do we decompartmentalize, or what's your approach? How do you, what do you advise there?
Yeah, I'm really not a fan of compartmentalization, so thanks for bringing that back. What happens is like that scenario you brought up earlier, where if you're feeling triggered, you're in a business environment or whatever it is, it could be with a spouse, a loved one, whatever it is, and you don't have the ability to move through it in real time. What the breath process can do for you is to go unpack that before you drift to sleep at night, because most of us are like, on unconscious level, meaning real. We don't even realize we're doing it, but we aren't able to process it. So what compartmentalization is, it's like putting it in a box up on a shelf in the mind, wrapping it up with a bow, and then it just collects dust. And then it lingers and it lingers and it lingers. So using the breath process before you go to sleep, you can kind of like go through your day and be like, okay, what I experienced today? Oh, there was that, there was this. Okay, let me go through all of these steps so that you can move through it. Because I go deep in the woo. I go deep in the spiritual stuff for sure. And I do my best to teach what I'm teaching now and explain it in a very grounded type of way. But when I am going deeper, like say leading a breathwork journey, which is breathing nonstop for say an hour or so, you can literally feel reborn after that experience. I know I did, and many people I've facilitated and know as well. And what happens there is not only are you processing unprocessed trauma, but all these boxes of compartmentalization that never got actually opened up and processed. So if we utilize the breath process, we don't have to carry all that energy with us, and we can move through it in real time, which is why like I'm such a fan of the breath process, because it's literally a roadmap of how to move through these things. It's nothing new. It's very similar to what everyone else is talking about, whether it be Dr. Joe Dispenza, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, Tony Robbins, or any of this. It's just giving it an accessible roadmap. Because when I went down all these different rabbit holes of all these teachers and all the things I've learned, I never had a tangible roadmap that made sense to me. So I built this as simple as possible so that we can really take it and utilize it in our everyday life.
Well, that's great. And it's funny that I was just introduced to that concept of revisiting those things before you go to sleep. And I'm almost convinced, I think it was a Huberman Lab podcast about sleep and the disruptors of sleep, and how if we can review the things that were an irritation, that were a problem, that were a worry, and, give them their voice, in an orderly way before you go to bed at night, before you sleep, it affects it improves your sleep through the night. And I was actually kind of skeptical to hear that, just because my tendency is to probably compartmentalize too much and to say, okay, I do not, I know if I feed this thing right now before I go to bed, it's going to, pester me all night. And so it's interesting that twice in the last week, probably I've had this advice handed to me. So maybe I do need to pay some attention to it.
Well, the funny thing there, real quick, is like we can look at that from the reticular activating system, which is a piece in the brain, the RAS, that brings that more into your field and awareness. And that's not using woo language. Right. Or if I want to put my woo hat on, I'm like, oh, well, there's the synchronicities where you're being called to look at something. And that's the lens of soul life balance for me, because I don't want to go too far of like the woo of being like, oh, it's all a sign. It's all like perfect. And I don't want to go too far on the life side where I become disconnected from the magic of the world. So that's really like the essence of soul life balance, just because you brought that up. And one more thing real quick, what you mentioned about you don't want to drift off to sleep, like feeling those things, which is exactly why the fifth step of the breath process is to transform it into an empowering belief, right? Because a lot of times these things get stuck either in not processing the toxic positivity, or it gets stuck in the shadow work where it's not being alchemized, to use a woo word, or in grounded language, transform it into something that is feeling more empowered. So like I said, like Huberman is very much referenced in my book, Overcome the Overwhelm, things I teach. I'm taking concepts out there that a lot of the most respected teachers that are grounded in science are teaching, and putting them into a framework where it's like, now I heard that thing, but I can actually integrate it into my life.
That's great. And it's all the time we have. If you want to hear more, join us at the North Texas SHRM Annual Conference on April 28th and 29th. You can register for that at ntxshrm.org. Thanks for joining me today, Sam.
Thanks, Mike.
And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please write us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening, and share this episode on your favorite social platform. It helps us reach more listeners. And we'd love to hear your thoughts at goodmorninghr.com. Thank you to our technical producer, Rob Upchurch, and to Imperative's marketing coordinator, Marianne Hernandez, who keeps the trains running on time. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.